more than just wheat breeders and our field agronomist teams out there, we could share a story with upper leadership as we're stepping through hybrid wheat and where we're at. Like I said, I'm presenting on behalf of our entire business. And so the three main partners that we have working in the wheat space at Corteva, it is R&D, which is of course where I am. I'm in the part of Corteva that's called seed product development. So in the R&D, responsible for bringing the genetics forward. And then of course, because I work for a large corporate ag company, there's a business component. So the business wants to make sure that it makes how we're doing production, geographies that we're going into, and just where we can go with this in the short, mid, and long term. And then our real key partner, especially in hybrid wheat, is on the bottom, and that's our global seed operations. And so those are the folks that take our parent inbred handoffs, and they not only increase the parent inbreds, but then are also responsible for making the hybrid seed. And as we know, making the hybrid seed and making it well at scale has actually been one of the real challenges with hybrid wheat over the past couple of years. And so these are the three main parts of Corteva that are spending a lot of time together and working on hybrid wheat. So, but I did want to kind of give a real shout out to our global seed ops. Their partnership has just been incredible over the past several years. This is going to be a very North America centric talk, so I'm just being really upfront about that right now, and as well as where Corteva plans to go with our hybrid wheat. So you'll see there's a map kind of on the left-hand side of your screen with the three major growing areas. And again, I'm limiting this to just the three main market classes. Acknowledge that there's several other market classes not represented well here. And then on the right-hand side of the screen is, of course, the map of Canada and the Canadian provinces. So with us at Corteva, we sell varietal soft red winter wheat today. So we sell wheat from Georgia up through Ontario. And while we are very excited about that and very proud of what we do there, we do not yet participate in the hard red winter wheat area or the hard red spring. And so those are two areas that we plan to enter with hybrids. So it's expanding our geography for us, and then of course, over time transitioning our soft red winter wheat acres as well. So again, just wanted to frame up this very North America centric talk. And then because I know I'm going to lapse into abbreviations and timelines, I wanted to be very upfront about that as well. So I'm going to talk again, kind of have our table on the screen here. The left-hand side, when I say hard red spring, soft red winter, hard red winter, those are the three main market classes that we plan to participate with in hybrids. If I lapse into abbreviations, my abbreviations are next. So it'll be HRS, SRW, HRW. And then as all of us on the phone and a video probably know, so those are based on the kernel texture, the kernel color, and then whether it is planted in the spring or whether it's planted in the fall. And I gave just some general timelines about when we harvest and the life cycle in months. Because as was mentioned in the introduction, I came from soybeans. Soybeans are amazing, right? You can have seed in 100 days. It is super easy. And I can grow soybeans all around the world. I can grow them in Argentina and Chile and Puerto Rico and Hawaii. And it is a luxury that I took for granted until I got into winter wheat, when I realized that that opportunity is actually not readily available in the winter wheat classes. So all of us on the phone, I think, are familiar with that. But for me, coming out of soybeans many years ago, I was kind of horrified actually about how long it takes to grow winter wheat and just what that means for cycle times. It does push a person to be very inventive right on the front end of their pipeline on how they're handling things. But again, North America centric. If I lapse into acronyms, it will be due to this table right here. With hybrid wheat, I get the question occasionally. There's so much to work on and so much to do. And I think if folks that are starting into hybrid wheat or kind of wheat in general, you can have this feeling of, I have this wonderful varietal crop, right? And to make it go from varietal to hybrid, there's so much to solve. And a lot of it's around the genetics and the seed production. And it can kind of, start to feel overwhelming. But for me, the interesting part about hybrid wheat is seeing all the different pieces and how it's really just a puzzle that we're building, right? So we're building different genetic production, all these different types of pieces together, making the right connection, knowing that we are aimed at hybrid wheat as our final goal. And so I'm going to spend the next many slides stepping up through kind of how we identified those puzzle pieces and things in general that we've done to start to solve and snap everything together so that we have a workable system that we can deploy at scale. And this is our challenge. I think all of us know this. But the challenge, if you look here on the screen, you think about the size of a wheat head, and you think about, it's probably not even quite as big as the palm of your hand, depending on how big your hands are. And that each of them are covered in many small, complete, perfect flowers, where you have that male and that female component of the flower really close together. And I do like to give my corn colleagues a little bit of a hard time because Corteva, you know, started kind of, if you go back through the pioneer part of it, back in, I think, 1926, on the idea that hybrid corn would out yield varietal corn. But they had such an advantage because the female part of the flower is the ear, right? And that's about hip height. And the male part of the flower is the tassel, and that's at head height. And if you need to separate those, you can just cut the top of the plant off. Whereas if we go through and cut the top of the plant off, we have lost all of our seed. And so bringing forward an interesting genetic solution to help solve that challenge so that we can have, pollen producing a parent, that male inbred separate from our female. We don't want our female to produce pollen. And then being able to have that pollen move appropriately, it's really quite the challenge to solve. But I think this group knows what wheat looks like, but I do use this picture quite a bit just to show folks the complexity and how many flowers are packed into a very small space. And as I was thinking about this, I was home, my folks' farm in southern Minnesota. So I was home over Memorial Day. So this is a picture from my parents' farm. And this, I don't know if any of you have teenagers, but I do. And occasionally they are wonderful people, but they do drive you nuts. And so I had gone for a walk, and that's my folks' farm. You can kind of see the farm place in the background there. But as I was going for a walk, that grass hill area that I was standing on when I took the picture, that's actually the original dugout. So when the family came over in 1877, that first winter, they didn't have a house, right? So it was very common at that point in the prairies in Minnesota, in that area specifically, that you would find a hill that was big enough and you would dig yourself into the side of the hill. And then you can still see there's some indents in the side of the hill where the two windows used to be and a door. And the first family lived there for 2 winters before they could start building up into the farm site of what it is now. And I thought that is about 148 years of my folks still live on the home site of progress. And that progress came again from connecting ideas and making things move forward, but looking at the progress in 148 years, I think is absolutely tremendous. And if you think about with hybrid wheat, it will not take us hopefully 148 years to get there, right? Because we know what we need to focus on, and it's really yield, sterility, and a decent production system. But I was thinking, think about the long arc of progress and what we have for technology now in hybrid wheat to really move those types of things along. And so what we started with at Corteva is wanted to get to know our final customer. And as I give a lot of things in PowerPoint, right? And as I put these together, if you type in like the PowerPoint icons and you say, give me a picture of a farmer, it gives you these 2 icons. And I have worked with thousands of farmers in my career. And I have met them wearing bibs. I've met them wearing hats. I've met them, leaning on pitchforks. But I have never, ever met a farmer that, number one, has a pitchfork as their only type of technology and is using that technology so incorrectly that they would have the pointy part up by their head. So I think just updating all of the assumptions to what the current standards are, and just with our timelines in wheat, how long it takes to work through the crop. So with North America farmers, we know they use a lot more technology than a pitchfork, and we know that wheat breeding needs to follow suit. And so as I put a call out to some of my agronomist friends, said, hey, do you got any pictures, inside the cab? What are things looking like these days? This is one of the pictures that came back through. So this is from a farmer in Oklahoma. And you can see, this is it's an older cab. It's been retrofitted with a couple of different screens, but you can see that there is a screen there for the GPS in the upper left part of your picture. And then there are some screens for the planter, where the planter's at in the field, seeding rate. And then because it's running on GPS, there is Netflix running on one of the other screens, right? So that's the kind of tech that is the norm and the expectation. And my dad is in his early 70s. His cab is not quite this high tech, um, but it's pretty close. So I would say this isn't a young farmer, old farmer, but just making sure that we are updated to current expectations and having wheat breeding operate under those same types of expectations. So as we were thinking about hybrid wheat, we wanted to make sure that our scientists are focused on what types of hybrids are necessary in the geographies of interest. And us at Corteva, we call that a product concept. And so our product concept is where we have defined goals. So we're looking at distinct product types that farmers use on their operation to fit a specific need. And so if we think about what a farmer would need, say, of spring wheat in North Dakota, quite different actually than what a West Central farmer or West Central Kansas farmer will need. So being really clear about each of our programs, knowing what they're aimed at, their main traits of interest, and then because this is wheat and not corn, we need to be pretty focused. Farmers don't want a lot of complexity in their wheat lineup. They want a very streamlined, widely adapted types of products on their farm. Where farmers will tolerate up to 5 or more corn hybrids, they're not going to tolerate 5 to 8 different wheat hybrids, right? We need to be really clear about the adaptation needs that our wheat hybrids have going forward. So product concepts are where we started, and we worked with our field sales team to help us filter through a lot of that. Once we had our product concepts aligned, then we looked at what pieces we already had at Corteva overall in wheat. And so we do have our existing varietal wheat business. We've been breeding wheat consistently for 55 years. We do have Corteva's hybrid crop model. As I mentioned, Corteva was founded on the idea that hybrid corn would out-yield varietal corn. And because of that, that idea that folks had back in the 1920s and 30s, farming worldwide looks very different today than it might have otherwise looked. And we've applied that hybrid crop model to several different crops as we've gone through our journey. You think about sorghum, and I think for Corteva, canola is our most recent crop to go from varietal to hybrid, and that was just in the early 2000s. And then with wheat specifically, within Corteva, we have what we call our proprietary hybridization system. So and I'll step through this in a couple of slides, but using something different than CMS. And again, if you put all this together, nothing like this has ever been done before. So for us, this is very exciting. Sometimes it can be slightly unnerving, right? Because anytime you do something different, people get a little nervous. But for us, we're really focused on building on what we have for our varietal wheat business, applying the hybrid crop model that we know works across a lot of different crops, and then putting the right hybridization system together with all of that to make it run. And our hybrid crop model, looks very similar, right? It's in general, it's a funnel, and you can shape your funnel however you want, wider, shorter, taller, skinnier, narrower. But for us, it's really broken into 2 parts. So that upper part, that is our inbreds, and that's where we're looking at many thousands of things, and we are completely genotype driven at that point. I'm going to spend a couple slides talking about our predictions, but that prediction framework and how that runs early on with our inbreds is really important, because the first time our material hits the field, it actually hits the field in a hybrid format. And so with our hybrids, once things hit yield trials, right, then we're a little more space constrained. So we have fewer things and are very phenotype driven at the bottom. And then as well, because of that early part, and we want to cycle very quickly through our germplasm, we have the early inbred development part centralized. We call it in general our nurseries, but that can include both field and greenhouse. And then the later part, that's where we're very localized. So we make a really clear distinction. We need to have localized on-farm testing for anything that has to do with the hybrids. And that's where some of our specialized phenotyping comes on board as well, things besides yield, things like lodging and other traits that we have of interest, but kind of having the two buckets of our inbreds and our hybrids and then centralized to localized is in general how all of our crops operate. I mentioned, I joined hybrid wheat in 2018, and canola had been the crop that had most recently gone through like heterotic group formation and you know, gone through the whole hybrid experience. And so when I joined, we had talked to the canola group previously and the team had set things up, but I was new. I come from soybeans and I wanted to learn a little bit more about canola. So I went up, visited him. Jay Patel was a very good canola breeder for us. And I went up to meet him in Ontario and I said, Jay, I really want to learn about, the thought process as you were setting up heterotic groups and what that looked like. And he comes in and he just whips down these two books. He goes, "This is not rocket science, Jess." He's like, "You get what you select for, and it's all right here." And he whips down Dr. Hollauer's Quantitative Genetics and Maize Breeding, and then papers on quantitative genetics and other topics. He said, "You just have to do it. You get what you select for." And I thought that was an interesting perspective from a crop that had gone through that conversation more recently, right, than say corn or sorghum. And after being through all of that, he's like, "The theory works. You just need to do it." And I thought that was such a straightforward way to approach heterotic group formation. And so we took that back with the team, right? And like I said, I joined partway through our hybrid wheat story. But so as we were setting up heterotic groups, this was another thing I think, unless you work in a company like Corteva, especially with graduate students, I do get the question, right, of how do you make these types of decisions? And for us, it was really pretty straightforward. We gathered all the data that was available. Of course, we read all the literature that we had, worked with a lot of our statisticians to go through some different method evaluations and some simulations. And I don't know how other companies have stepped through this, but y'all, we had some spirited debate about how we wanted to do het group formation and het group setup. I mean, we had some debate and it was all good fun and good natured, but we just really hammered through it. And so once we had everybody agreed, had gone through all the literature, evaluations, simulations, and then we just had to do it, right? So selected our heterotic groups within each of our market classes, and from there we've just stuck with it. And we've seen things start to separate really, really well over time. But I do think as we're starting in the hybrid wheat journey, I think setting up heterotic groups can actually be a tripping, like a thought process people can kind of get tripped up on is the how to do it and if you are doing it correctly. And for us, what we've seen is once we're comfortable with our methodology, selected our het groups and stuck with it. Again, like I said, Jay came in and he whipped those two books down on the table, but it really works. The theory, it's amazing. Thinking about genetic theory across crops and how well that it actually works. And this is in general. So now we have our product concepts, so we know what we're aiming at. We have our heterotic groups established, and then putting in some general framework of how we wanted to approach hybrid wheat breeding in the company. It's all based off of our stable and efficient inbred development, because as you know, without inbreds, you don't go anywhere, right? And that you need to have the right number of inbreds every year to make your estimation sets run. I mentioned our early testing. Our heterotic groups, once we were set up, then it's about separating. And it's just about rapid genomic recurrence selection. Again, corn's been doing this for a lot of years, but they were doing it phenotypically, so visually, for many, many decades. And with the genomic recurrence selection, we've seen our ability to separate things really, really quickly. And with that early testing, to get that het group read and then keep things moving apart, getting the maximum number of genetic combinations in yield trial testing right from the start every single year has been a real focus for us, so that seed production to get hybrid wheat in the field early on in our selection has been a real key for us. Of course, all of this is based with a parent trait focus. We set some height types of things, some anther density types of things, different traits that we're working on with our parents. That's part of that early stable inbred development, having that kind of selection as well, not just yield early on. And then our sterility conversion. So with our females, partway through our inbred development process, we do start them into what we call trait-in aggression. And so right now, that is how we are delivering our sterility conversions to make our hybridization process run, is starting that partway through our inbred development process. And then the final several years of yield trial testing, we are using the converted inbred, so we don't have any um, learning opportunities, right, that occasionally comes when things come out of trait-in aggression. But it's not exactly what you were selecting for. So we do want to have the last couple of years of field testing utilizing the converted inbreds. I know anyone who has a TI or trait-in aggression pipeline, it is great and it does great things. But in every crop, occasionally there's just a little bit of something as you're going through selection that makes it important to do those, for us at least, the last couple of years, utilizing what we call our final version of each of the inbreds as we test the final version of the hybrids. And so we've talked about, we have our funnel, right? So heavy genomic selection early on, centralized in our nurseries. And I did just want to share a couple pictures of what that looks like here at Corteva. You'll hear me repeat, stable and scalable, right? Because with hybrid wheat, having a consistent way to develop and deliver seed every time you need it is key to making the whole thing go round. And so that stable and scalable inbred development, our wheat inbreds, we've actually centralized that. So they start with a team that their job, again, is having the right amount of inbreds available per program at the right time for us to make selections. And with winter wheat, of course, sometimes it's as easy as working on what you're doing in vernalization to make sure things head really well. But that stable and scalable inbred development pipeline, and then being able to sample, of course, as we go through that to make our selections. I say that like it's easy, but we spent like 4 years getting to where we're at today. So that stable, scalable inbred development, all of you know, it is a real key to making hybrid wheat go round, at least for us. And then we had to solve some of the part as we look through working through the genome, because that is our basis of all of our breeding theory and selection. Some of the general pieces that we wanted to put in place for wheat that were missing, because the wheat genome was just published in 2018, so we needed to bring a lot of things in, match up with what we were doing already, and getting some proprietary pangenomes built in-house, doing some different work on genetic maps. For us, having a real scale our genotyping and auto scoring of that genotyping was really important. And then with the wheat genome, again, I come from soybeans where the genome is just laughably small, right? So understanding the structural complexity of the wheat genome and how we can use it in selection and make sure that we understand what some of that structural complexity can look like. So there's a whole team that has been really integral for us because we decided that reciprocal recurrent genomic selection is how we wanted to separate het groups. Being able to do that well and at scale, just solving through some of these different things has been kind of a key for us. And then the off-season work. The greenhouse team, I want to give them props. They are amazing. So beyond what we do in our field nurseries, of course, there's a greenhouse component, which you see here on a picture of some of the crossing that was going on the day I happened to be over there taking a picture. But again, that stable and scalable part of this, being able to increase the number of seeds per plant while balancing our overall footprint, and then having spring wheat kind of pop in and out at different points in the cycle, our greenhouse team has been amazing. And I do want to just acknowledge all of the effort that team has put in for us, again, on getting the right amount of seed in the right spot at the right time has really allowed all of our systems to run. And then as we move, so that's kind of some of the things that we've had to solve through on the inbred part. Again, centralized a lot of it, reciprocal recurrent genomic selection to make things run and separate our het groups. And now, once things hit the field, they do hit the field as hybrids. And so when we move out to the field, move into some of that specialized phenotyping on farm, my scientists are great, but just data. Love data. Data is the absolute favorite, right? And how we generate our data, that is out with our research centers. So this is kind of what it looks like. So we have our multi-crop research centers scattered out and about around the countryside, and this was where our final several years of testing occur. You can see there's some nursery pictures on the right-hand side. But the phenotyping is focused primarily on yield, and then of course agronomics, with yield being one of the really important agronomic things besides disease that we work on. Specialty traits, including all the way through to our end-use quality traits in wheat. And then environmental characterization. So as our phenotype is coming back in, it allows us to feed our environmental characterization models to make sure that we are testing in the right environments to hopefully, again, match up to that product concept that we wanted to work through. And the purification part of this, I don't see the purification folks get a huge shout out in a lot of talks, but again, the right kind of seed in the right spot at the right time. So if Global Seed Ops is expecting X number of pounds of seed from me, of a parent inbred to match up with a certain point in our testing, we do need to be able to deliver that. So our purification as well happens with a couple of centralized teams out in the field, and those folks are really, really amazing and great at what they do. With our estimation sets, if you walk into almost any of our sites, the majority of what you'll see is actually estimation sets. We've just put that as a foundation on how we want our programs to run long term. Again, we want to be able to do that genomic selection at scale. And this is a picture of one of our sites. So you can see I have a couple of icons across the top there. There's a lot of different people that are in and out of our sites taking different types of data. We have very traditional types of data, like, anything that you can do with a combine, or, some of the things that are just really core to what we do. But also we move to a lot of specialized drone phenotyping for things like height and lodging. And then some of the sampling and just how that feeds into our overall system integration. So getting all that data together and back so that our breeders can make decisions. Right now, I had mentioned kind of at the top of the call, 2 of our winter wheat programs, they are more than 50% harvested. So they can see the decision timeline coming, right? And they need to be able to bring not only what is coming off the combine, but with how the estimation sets are updated, any sort of the drone phenotyping specialty, all that needs to come together. And so the system integration part of that to allow our scientists to be able to make decisions, not only really accurately, but really smoothly in a tight time window has been really, really key for us. But again, if you walk into a lot of our sites, you will see there's a real emphasis on having our estimation sets and having them kind of at the right scale to feed our models long term. And that's just something that we've decided is a real key for how we want to do this. So shifting now, so we've talked about our product concepts, how we're working through the inbred part, a little bit about the hybrid part. And as we transition partway through our inbred development, we do transition into the sterility part. So we call that our hybridization system, proprietary to Corteva, novel to Corteva. It is patented and developed just with good old-fashioned traditional plant breeding. So this is a non-GMO, non-CRISPR type of thing, but based on 30 years of biology and hybridization research. This, our hybridization system was actually based on something that was found in Pioneer back in 1993 when they were looking at sterility systems in corn and different sterility loci. And then that information kind of sat hanging out with that team till the wheat genome was published as it was getting closer in 2018. And then we could look through what is available for beyond the known sterility loci in wheat, what is possible there, and we could put together what those folks had found 30 years ago in corn. And then, of course, leveraging a lot of our new breeding tools and technologies that have come around since then. And with hybrids, with varietal wheat, you need to produce one parent and you need to produce it really, really well. With hybrids, we need to produce 2 parents, produce it really, really well. And the hybridization system, of course, is focused on the female part of that. So our females are non-pollen producing, and then how we plant them with our males, right? That's how the hybrid wheat seed is available for farmers. And on the next slide, a little more detail about that. So to think to yourself that you want to use a hybridization system that's completely different than what the rest of the industry has tried before, That's not a decision that we made overnight. We didn't wake up one morning and decide to do that. We spent several years actually vetting out the idea of what we view as a breakthrough technology to enable that value creation. So we spent several years looking at comparing to what the leading system is, which in wheat is usually a CMS or cytoplasmic based sterility system, and then did the comparisons to make sure this was the route that we want to go down. What we see with Corteva's genetic system, so again, I mentioned it's non-GMO, it's also non-CMS. So it is not a CMS-based system. Selfishly, from a breeding perspective, it is stable in all of the germplasm environments and wheat classes that we've tested to date. So as we were working through CMS, occasionally we'd see some of our females or some of our males weren't working well in that system. And so with the Corteva system, we see really good acceptance across germplasm and environments. It, of course, makes it a little more efficient for us in the plant breeding process because we don't need to have like a built-in attrition rate that we had with CMS. And then with our parent production, we also see some real advantages because with our female parent, we just don't need as much land to produce our female parents as we were thinking that we were needing to do with CMS. And that, of course, allows us to scale a little bit better in our overall hybrid wheat production efficiency. So like I mentioned, it works well in all environments and geography because it's system germplasm independent. It has allowed us to focus on parent traits in a little more targeted way. So we've spent that additional space that freed up focused on parent traits and delivers for us a nice production cost advantage. With our winter wheat especially, we can bring our females up to scale at least twice as fast using the Corteva system than what we could with CMS. Like I said, we spent a lot of years doing that side-by-side comparison and focusing on the female parent, what we could deliver there. So for us, we really think this is our breakthrough with hybrid wheat, is how we're going to deliver the sterility part in the female of the hybrid production system. We don't have our season's results in yet, but I thought I'd share what we saw in 2024. So the hard red winter wheat, so if you think about that kind of that Kansas, Colorado, Nebraska, Oklahoma area, you can see we have some yield in bushels per acre on the left-hand side with our 3 leading varieties, what we have targeted as our initial launch hybrids for that 2027 timeframe, and then pipeline hybrids around. So we see a nice yield advantage with our initial launch hybrids, but for me, it's more exciting to see that the selection in the pipeline is working with things that are coming later on, having some of that additional genetic gain. So we know our initial hybrids have some nice yield increase over commercial varieties, and we do see that increase grow under stress conditions. If you think about like a heat drought stress condition, that's where we see that yield advantage grow up to 20%. With the pipeline hybrids, that's really saying that our selection is working. We have some real benefits because, admittedly, corn pays for the drones and wheat just uses them, right? So we have some real benefits of leveraging in that across Corteva R&D methods. And with 2024, our harvest results were consistent with what we had seen previously, and they appear to be consistent with what we are seeing in 2025. So this is as we're wrapping it all together from product concept to inbred creation, testing in the field, hybrids, converting for sterility. This is what is starting to look like overall. And then our producing it at scale, right? So this is a picture of our global seed operations folks out in the field. And this is the team that we in R&D work really closely with about being able to scale that handoff and what it is going to look like over time. And it's really surprising when you think about, we produce several million units of wheat already every year for sale in the eastern US. And then thinking about how we scale that out to go west and north and how we can do that in a really cost efficient manner, because we know farmers are very practical people. And so they will pay for value, but like any good consumer, right, they're never going to overpay. So we want to make sure that the scale that we can deliver seed at is commensurate with what the value that it will bring. And because this would not be a hybrid wheat talk without at least showing a couple pictures of anthers, here we are. So anther density is one of our main traits that we're focused on the male side. And so you can see out of the floret. So when we talk about anther density, that's what we're talking about there. And anther density for us, that was actually the first AI model generated at Corteva was for anther density, and that was back in 2018. So for us, first AI model at Corteva that was about anther density. And we see just really nice correlation with what basically the more anthers you have, the more pollen you have, right? And now that we have a way to phenotype it really quickly out in the field, we're able to build our estimation sets up around it. And the other thing for us, anther density has really nice heritability in our germplasm, which allows our breeders to select and move it forward. Anyhow, more anthers we see, it's heritable, the more hybrid seeds that we get. So that's kind of the point of my anther density story. Okay, and then production, right? So with the production part of this is where I start to step out of my expertise. So working with our global seed ops folks, they are really big in the right amount of seed, right place, right time. So I've learned a lot about parent planning at Corteva, some of the quality assurances that we're putting in place, some of the quality assurances that we do for field production, and how we are going to step this out into our overall commercial supply chain. And this happened to be a picture inside our Litchfield facility when we were there last year. So kind of wrapping this up, and hopefully we should have some time for a chat and some questions. So with Corteva wheat, we have our existing varietal wheat business, been doing it for 55 years. We have applied our hybrid crop model to a lot of different crops over time, and wheat is our next on our list. Have a proprietary hybridization system, which we feel is very exciting and has some real advantages on how we want to do breeding in the hybrid wheat space. And just acknowledge that nothing like this has been done before. So excited to step through that with the industry overall and look forward to where the journey takes us. One last picture. So again, like I said, I was up at my folks' farm in southern Minnesota back on Memorial Day weekend. And they had recently taken down, one of those like big red wooden barns that had gotten hit by a wind event. So it had taken the roof off. But they had kept some of the stones. And so this was a pile of stones that they had kept. And the barn was put up, we think, right around like 1900. And according to my great uncle Robert, the person who started flattening the stones, because what you see in the kind of the middle there, those are the flat stones or the cornerstones where you had to start building. And he said, it was a quote old guy, which Robert was a kid at the time, so he was probably 30 or something, right? But the old guy was sitting around smoking a pipe, and he said he'd spend some time and he'd look at each rock. And he'd walk around and he'd look at it, walk around and look at it, and then he'd hit it with his hammer and a chisel. And then he'd walk around, he'd look at it, walk around, look at it, and hit it with his hammer and a chisel. And over time, after a course of a day, he had the cornerstones and all the flat stones so they could start building. And then from there, foundation, then they could build. And I think with hybrid wheat, again, as we connect those ideas, if we get the right foundation in place, the right sterility system, right germplasm, get your heterotic group set and focus, I really feel like getting that foundation set and then the rest of it will just go up from there. And so with that, Corteva's been in the public space looking to launch hybrid wheat in the hard red winter in fall of 2027. So for us, it's getting pretty close. We feel like the time is now. Thank you.